Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, sorry, to
Yeah.
start again.
Um, I suppose it's pitching at the right level for me. I failed the inspector's board last time. The feedback was my examples were those of a competent sergeant, which is not what I was aiming for, really.
Oh, okay. Was that for all the questions, or most of them, or just some of them?
Just some of them.
Some of them. Was that the main feedback? Was it?
Um, yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
the bit that failed you.
Yeah, and I also think because I'm in a specialist role as well,
Yeah.
people don't quite often understand the example that I'm giving.
So there's two things there actually. One of them is, um, yeah, competent sergeant, and the other one is specialist role. So I don't need to know. I don't need to know what specialist role you're in, but it's a trap. But I'll talk to you about how you might be able to try and escape that trap. Whether you think it's
Yeah.
fair or unfair, it just is the system. So yeah, I've got some advice and guidance for that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Emma. Super. Thank you for your question. So Emma, you asked two questions. One of them is pitching at the right level. You failed your inspector board. You gave evidence which gave an indication that you're a competent sergeant. I suppose this links in with what I've just said there in terms of stepping up. What would a wise inspector do in this given set of circumstances? And actually, in a one-to-one today, I've just been doing some coaching for someone who's going for their inspectors. Let me just see if we can lean on it because it was a really, really interesting conundrum that cropped up. Let's just find it. Wow, have I done that many coaching sessions today? I'm going back a long way here. Okay, so I can explain this without breaching confidence. So here's an example of where this individual had the same feedback
Hmm.
because they went for a board, failed it. And their feedback was your evidence was pitched at the wrong level. You were demonstrating that you're a really good sergeant. It's not what they're looking for. They're looking for someone who's got the potential to be a really good inspector. They're not looking for an awesome inspector yet because you might be in an acting position or temporary position, but they're not. They're completely accepting that you're not going to be the awesome inspector yet. I don't think I was awesome, but it took me about 3 or 4 years before I felt really, really, really confident in the role of inspector. You might be thinking that's a long time. Yeah, it is. But before I could really navigate the community safety partnership, um, deal with some very, very difficult welfare issues, deal with some very, very difficult standards, ethics issues. I think it was about, for me, it was about 3 or 4 years before I felt really comfortable and where I went to work thinking, it doesn't matter what happens, I've got it. I've got it. As an inspector, I've got it. So it takes a bit of time, and they're aware of that on the board. They're acutely aware of that. So this individual gave an example when we were practicing today of a difficult decision. And it was all around taking someone to stage 1 UPP and someone who they knew personally when they were both sergeants together. And that, on the face of it, might seem like, wow, it's a difficult decision, that. But then when we broke it down, what it really said was, I find decisions that involve other people who I might have worked with once really difficult. So I'm not really ready for the rank of inspector. It was something that you'd expect a good sergeant to be able to talk about, but not a good inspector. Is that resonating so far?
Um, yeah, I think the feedback with mine was I didn't finish it off with the wider implication for the force. So I
Right,
kind of finished it, but didn't go that bit further about
right. Well,
how
this
it
is
would.
yeah. I get you. This is exactly where this went. This is exactly the same. So we talked about is that strong enough, and we decided it's not actually because could a sergeant do that? Could a sergeant deal with someone and take him to stage 1 UPP? Yes, they could. Would a sergeant be expected to take a constable whose sickness record was, was not acceptable after the action plan and all the rest of it? could they take them to stage 1 UPP? Yes, they could. So it's at the wrong level. Then we started talking about, well, what came next? Well, what came next was where it goes after that, because clearly this individual was in a set of circumstances where the policy, this is another one again about policy, the policy said, right, next stage, whatever that is. I can't remember what it is these days. And I didn't even want to explore what it's called, but they could have taken them to the next stage. And what that might have resulted in is the individual maybe having to leave the force. But the waters got muddied with lots of conflicting conundrums. And so this individual, the person I was coaching, had to make a decision which was outside of policy. And where they took it to the chief inspector, and the chief inspector went, Joe, I just don't know. You make the call. Inspector. And actually, that's probably quite good guidance from the chief inspector, because otherwise the chief inspector is doing the role of an inspector. So now we've got an answer which is pitched at sort of inspector level. Is that making sense, Emma?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so we get one step further now. And this is where the real inspector stuff comes in, because we started thinking about and talking about, right, well, if this is one individual who, because it turns out I can't breach confidentiality, let's make sure I don't. Yeah, there were wider implications. And what came out of the interview, the discussion, was wider implications for the whole of the department and for the force. So I'm not saying what force it is neither. And so what this individual had to do was make some difficult decisions about how they prioritize their time and how they invested time in ensuring that the sort of issues that spilled out of the UPP meeting didn't spill out from other officers. And it turned out that there was a wider problem that they uncovered that they weren't aware of. But they were only aware of it because they started digging a bit deeper with their individual sergeants and PCSOs and PCs. And what they discovered was, and I'm not going to say what it was because I don't want to breach confidentiality, but they discovered that there was some wider issue that needed dealing with, which was impacting on sickness levels. Are you with me so far, Emma?
Yeah.
Is this sounding a bit more inspectory now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they had to then talk about that difficult decision. So what we're doing here is layering. I call it layering of decisions. So the first one is the decision that was quite difficult in the position of sergeant, but then, okay, I took it one step further and I had to make an inspector type decision. And then I took it one step further and I had to make an inspector type decision, which was actually one where I'm thinking about the priorities for the force. And I'm thinking about my position as a leader within the force and being able to contribute to change in the force and being able to ensure that the force delivers on what it needs to deliver in a way that is more effective, it's efficient, and it caters for the welfare of individuals, which then links in with so many other things like learning, changing behavior, standards, both standards of performance, investigation standards, ethical standards, welfare, retention, sickness levels. So they all sort of dovetail in with each other, talked about all of those things, and had some accounts of what difference it made to particular officers. So these particular officers benefited in a particular way. And also we talked about some people on a board might like stories like that, but others on the board, and you'll know who these people are, Emma, they're only interested in the stats, aren't they? Yeah, only interested in stats. You know, people like that. Yeah, lovely story. Thanks very much. Yeah, but what's the performance look like? So in the other pocket for the end result for the board was, okay, so that's some stories about what happened, which is very positive for those individuals, for that team. Here's what it really means in terms of the stats. So this time last year, the stats told us this. What I can tell you now is this is where I am. This is where my team is now in comparison to where they were before. Big jump. So that way, you're going to impress the people on the board who are thinking stats, and also you're going to impress the people on the board who like a good story, because you've got a mix of the two. Makes sense so far?
Yeah.
So that's where you need to be, Emma. Bottom line, that's where you need to be. Making decisions, dealing with complex problems, dealing with situations, challenging situations, which are at that inspector level, but not just dealing with the thing, but then starting to think, how is this going to impact on the wider, is this happening elsewhere? What's my wider responsibility as an inspector here to the force and ultimately to the community that we serve? And going that extra step of doing the things that you can do because it's within your gift to do so as an inspector. Might not be within your gift to do it as a sergeant, but certainly as an inspector, you've got a lot more capability and a lot more freedom, I would suggest, depending on the force you're in and the culture, but you've got a lot more freedom just to make things happen without having to ask your superintendent, can I do? Because they'll probably say is, I don't know, can you? Do you think you can? And you're going to go, yeah, I think I can. Right, get on with it then. Why are you coming to me? Why are you asking me? Get on with it, Inspector. You're an inspector now. Make sense, Emma?
Yeah.
So where's your frame of mind at the moment then? Where would you say your frame of mind was there then and your frame of mind now in terms of getting ready for your next board?
I need to do a lot of prep, really. I think it's difficult when you're in a specialist role because we don't have, like, I don't work with sort of partnerships very often.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to pass your board if you're in a uniformed role where you've got probationers and community problems and that sort of stuff you can solve, whereas I don't really have that.
Okay. I don't need to know what specialist role you're in, but we've got a lot of people we're working with at the moment who are in specialist roles who have the same conundrum that you get. And I get this. I funneled myself into a specific role as a sergeant whilst I was in Greater Manchester Police, where I was the only person in the force who was actually qualified to do the thing that I was doing. Because it needed someone, and this is College of Policing world, or back then it was National Police Training, or had they become Sencheks at that point? I think they were Sencheks at that point. This was a period of time in my career where I sort of did geeky training stuff, which is why I'm doing this stuff now, because I actually picked up a load of qualifications. One of the qualifications was a prerequisite that the force had to have someone with this specific qualification in it in order to perform a certain function. And I was the only one. And there's me wanting to get promoted to inspector. And I remember thinking, the only way I'm going to be able to do this, I think, is to transfer back to my old force of Cheshire. And when I made a polite inquiry with them, they said, we'd love to take you back, but as a sergeant. And I asked them, why is that? And they said, because you're not inspector ready as far as we're concerned. You're just not inspector ready. And that really hurt. And they said, well, okay, you might be able to demonstrate the behaviors at that strategic level. However, it's not what we're looking for. And so I think you've got a good point there, Emma, in that you can niche yourself into something so niche that actually it's hard to get out, and it's hard to actually get the opportunities to demonstrate what your capabilities are to a chief superintendent who's on your board, who's a chief superintendent of a borough or division where it's all their world is just operational. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you're telling them about some specialist stuff and their eyes are glazing over because they're thinking, frankly, I don't give a shit. Bluntly. That's what happens. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this real talk going on here. It's
Yeah.
real talk. Whether we like it or not, whether we think it's fair or not, doesn't matter. The golden rule applies. The golden rule is that those who hold the gold make the rules. So if they're thinking, I can't see Emma as an inspector on my division, they're going to fail you. They're going to fail you. So this is where we're working with, we've got probably about 4 or 5 people who are very niche at the moment who are going for promotion. And we're working with them to find opportunities that they can take in conjunction with and a liaison with their own supervision. And it requires a bit of time out at times. A bit of time out.
Yeah. I have taken on additional responsibilities, and I am in a temp role at the moment as well. And I've took on work that I think can assist on top
Yeah.
of my core business, really. So
All of
I
this,
think
all of what they're doing is out in the operational world. I mean, they're still retaining their core specialist position, but what they're doing is they're transferring aspects of that core specialist position into what they can do to help support the front line. And actually, some would say, shouldn't you be doing that anyway? That's a different argument. It's a different discussion. But what they're doing is they're taking what they're doing at the level of sergeant and inspector, because not both, they're all going for different roles. They're all sergeant and inspector roles that they're going for. But what they're doing is taking their specialist skills and then taking them to the operational world, directly to the operational world, and working with the superintendent and inspectors and sergeants to help take their area of business into the divisional world to help improve it in respect of the things that they're doing. I mean, one of them is in CT, the CT world, and he's doing some really interesting work now, which some would argue should be the work that his branch should be doing anyway. But after sitting down with him and coming up with, right, how are you going to be able to explain, how are you going to be able to talk about how you are operationally competent, basically promote me because you can be able to see me as a sergeant or inspector on your division, because that's the ultimate question. I think chief super on the board will be asking him or herself, can I see this person as an inspector or sergeant on my team? If the answer is no, it doesn't matter what boxes you're ticking on the CVF. If the answer is no, they're not going to promote you, are they?
No.
Are they? You know, it's just real talk, this. Whether it's fair or it isn't, this is just what happens. It's just the way it is. And so you've got to make yourself an attractive proposition to them by being able to basically press the buttons that are important to them. Now, if you had a board that was made up of solely senior officers that are from your world, would that be easier?
Would be a lot would be a lot easier.
Yeah, but the reality is that's not going to happen, is it?
No, because my last board I had 2 uniformed supers. Well, I'm not from a uniform background.
Fair or unfair? Is that fair or unfair?
I thought it was unfair to, but it is what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, what I'm going to say to you is, look, it's real talk time. This doesn't matter whether it's fair or unfair. The golden rule applies. Those who hold the gold make the rules. And ultimately, where needs, I know everyone's going to argue that, oh yeah, we need good leaders, blah 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 blah, but I'm going to put this out there. The place, as far as I'm aware from my connections within the police and from talking to lots of people who are still in the police who want to get promoted, I'm going to step out there and say that the place where they probably need the best leaders the most, with the most experience, is on the front line operationally. Because at the moment you've got right across the country, and I worked this out before Uplift. When Uplift was announced, what, 4 or 5 years ago now, I did the math, because you can work out how many people leave every year through resignations and retirements, how many are needed to replace them, and what happens when you add another 20,000 onto that. What it did is it created a scenario where around now, about 45% of all police officers in the country have less than 5 years service. And where do you think the majority of them are serving, Emma? I'll just repeat that again. About 45% of all police officers currently have less than 5 years service. Is that believable? Thumbs up if it's believable. Thumbs,
Yeah.
yeah. It is. I've done the math. You can't escape the math. So where do you think the majority of them are, Emma?
Well, response.
They're on response, aren't they?
Yeah.
So where is the weak spot for the force in terms of leadership?
On response.
Response, which is why I'm hearing now forces that allow, and this would have been unheard of 10 years ago when I was still in the job. And it's like, oh, I remember back in the day, but we're now hearing forces putting people in acting sergeants positions where they've not even sat the sergeant's exam, where they've just expressed an interest. I have heard of someone who is a DS, acting DS, who is doing their national investigators exam, and because they're doing their NIE, decided to do the sergeant's board, sergeant's promotion exam at the same time. Might as well. There's a crossover, isn't there? And so as soon as they put in for their sergeant's exam, they got made up to acting sergeant. acting DS actually. And you're thinking, holy moly, that's a risk area. I've also heard in some forces that we've got acting sergeants as custody officers. Unheard of in my time. But then again, I'm just an old fart, aren't I? But acting sergeants as custody officers, that tells me something about the weakness on the front line at this moment in time. So, Emma, that's where it is. That's what we've got to speak to. We've got to speak to the ideal inspector that they're looking for. And that would be my advice there, is that we've got to prepare you. You've got to enable yourself to prepare for a board where you are painting the picture of the best version of the future uniform inspector that you could be, because that could be where you get promoted to.
Yeah.
Despite the fact you might have a chief superintendent saying, once you get promoted, I really want to keep you in role. It's got nothing to do with them when it comes to, yeah, but actually the weak spot is on this division here where we've got 90% of everyone is acting. And and just about everyone's got under 3 years service who's a PC. It's just a real weak spot for the force now. It's just a ticking time bomb. A ticking time bomb. So Emma, is that making sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Helpful?
Yeah. Very.
Good. Thank you. Awesome.